Now
on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
7:06 on a Friday in your nation's capital, rounding out a intense and historic and unprecedented week in American politics. And we're here for it. We love it, and we're glad you're here with us. Coming up in 30 minutes, Greg Pemberton, he's the police union chairman in D.C., about those protests, about the attack on a fellow police officer, and about how no charges will be filed. At 8:05, Matt Bonesteel from the Washington Post sports reporter, give us a preview of the Olympics. It's the Olympics starting today. Ooh. Good Lord.
Yeah.
And at 8:35, Brett Baer, Fox News Channel, on an extraordinary week in politics, as I said. It's Larry O'Connor alongside Patrice Onwuka.
And it is a Friday, and boy, every week feels historic. Something earth-shattering happens.
That's right. Well, I said
we have normal.
Last time you and I spoke here, Joe Biden was still the top of the ticket for the Democrats.
Yes.
Now, not only has he stepped down, but what was originally going to be an open process to determine the new nominee was over within 24 hours. There was nothing open or grassroots or democratic about it. Now it appears Vice President Harris has positioned herself as the de facto new nominee. She's acting like she's president, meeting with foreign leaders, giving separate press conferences from the president himself. What's at play here, and how does it affect not just the presidential election, but the down ticket races? Well, joining us right now is the Republican candidate for a down ticket race. He's Derrick Anderson, running for Congress in the 7th Congressional District. Derrick, thanks for joining us.
Hey, good morning, y'all. Thanks for having me.
Well, does this change things for you at all in terms of how you approach your race against Mr. Vindman there in the 7th? Or at the very least, does it change what you're seeing in terms of energy from the electorate?
Well, Larry, one of the things that I think a lot of folks are forgetting is that Vice President Kamala Harris, was in fact the vice president during President Biden's failed 3.5 years, right? Yeah. There's a lot of talk, and you see the news. And by the way, you guys are absolutely right. It hasn't been a crazy week in politics. It's been a crazy couple of weeks in the news cycle, needless to say. But, right now, if you look at it, Vice President Harris, right now she looks like she's going to be the presumptive nominee for the Democrat Party. And at the end of the day, she also has to still answer for all the failed policies as the Vice President of the United States with Joe Biden. Whether it's the fact that our border is completely porous and we've seen millions upon millions of illegal immigrants come in to the United States and affect us here in the 7th Congressional District, right? I think we talked briefly about a month or so ago, Larry, when we saw 2 illegal immigrants of Jordanian descent posing as Amazon drivers attempting to come to the front gate of Marine Corps Base Quantico, right here in the 7th Congressional District, right? She has to answer for why we see the flow of fentanyl killing people across the United States, across the Commonwealth. She has to answer for those. We see the economy right now where it's costing the average Virginia family here in the Commonwealth about $1,100 more a month just to live, not to go on a fancy restaurant, not go on a vacation, but just to live. So, she can try to walk away from all of these issues as much as we want, but we're still gonna, the citizens of Virginia and the 7th District are still going to be asking those questions of why did you fail at all of these things over the last 3.5 years? So I think that's what's important. And same with my opponent right now. My opponent, Mr. Vindman, he doesn't really talk much about anything. So he's tied to President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris and all of their failed policies. So I don't think it affects us too much because, they were the president and vice president for 3.5 years.
Speaking of your opponent, he had an opportunity to speak up, and we earlier this morning we talked about the ridiculous, heinous display we saw on Capitol Hill this week, the pro-Hamas protesters tearing down the American flag, burning it, but then some real patriots replacing that flag. You were out there, Derrick, is that correct?
Yeah, so I actually I drove up there, and I walked up to Union Station to go. I wanted to see it myself. It's one thing to see it on Twitter. It's one thing to see it on social media. It's another thing when you're walking down the street of our nation's capital and you see trash. You see, there were tons. I was actually with my mom. My mom came with me. She wanted to see it herself as well. And we saw the graffiti all over the statues. I walked up right as some of the folks from the Republican caucus were hoisting the flags up. Wow. We walked up right as they were doing it. And for me, it was tough. It was one of those things. Someone asked me yesterday. They were like, "Are you mad, Derrick?" I was like, it was a mixed bag of emotions. I served in the Army for a little over 10 years. I was a Green Beret. I draped that flag when I did funerals in Arlington National Cemetery, over 150 of them. I draped that flag over 150 caskets of our service members, before their families saw them laid to rest. I had 5 of my guys killed in Afghanistan, and I saw the flag. That was the last time I saw my guys before I saw them back in the United States. Was on the back of a C-130 with that flag draped on top of it. So for me, watching the images that we saw on social media and on TV of individuals pulling the flag down, throwing it on the ground, lighting it on fire, it was just disrespectful. And as you mentioned, my opponent was silent for almost 24 hours. He puts a lackluster response out. I mean, people in the 7th District want leaders that are able to respond, and this should have been an easy one, right? Like, this should have been, I disagree with the fact that people took the American flag down and lit it on fire. I don't understand why that was such a big deal for him to come out and respond to. But again, and as a conservative, as someone who agrees and holds the First Amendment in the highest light, just because you have the right to do something doesn't necessarily make it right. I think that's what we're missing as a country right now.
So we're speaking with Derrick Anderson. He's running for Virginia 7. And he's running against Eugene Vindman, and he's tried to make the impeachment of Donald Trump the centerpiece, because people hear the name Vindman and they think, oh, Trump, Ukraine, impeachment, and that's it. Eugene Vindman is running against Donald Trump, but it's important to actually, he's also trying to say that he's got these huge foreign policy credentials. So I'm searching his social media platform, and I'm trying in vain to find any statement about Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech, and whether he would have even shown up to the speech, or whether he would have joined Kamala Harris and the other squad members in a boycott. And I see nothing here where he's supposed to be a foreign policy expert. So let me ask you, first of all, I'm assuming, Derrick Anderson, since you were there to decry the Palestinian protesters, that you would have absolutely been there to represent your district at the speech. But also, what is your position on the way forward for the state of Israel and the existential fight they're in against Hamas?
Yeah, and Larry, if you take a look back at Mr. Vindman over the last few weeks, if you look through his social media, look at anything that he's been asked about, he didn't come out after President Biden had his disastrous speech, right? Yeah. There was a lot of riff amongst the Democrats as to whether or not they were supporting President Biden moving forward. We didn't see him respond after Prime Minister Netanyahu announced that he was coming to the United States and speak in front of our Congress, but then speak in front of our Congress. So, that's pretty lackluster in my opinion. I mean, at the end of the day, people in the 7th, they just want basic answers, like, where do you stand on these things? I've been very, very open about my support to Israel. I think it's very interesting that a lot of these pro-Hamas protesters, a lot of these people forget what happened just several months ago on October 7th, where we had hundreds of Israelis and Americans that, were killed, that were taken capture and taken into Gaza, that are still being held against their will in Gaza. I just don't understand how these individuals don't remember that. And we didn't see Mr. Vindman say much about, if I don't believe anything, about the protests that were happening on our college campuses across the country as well. So, again, these, in my opinion, are pretty easy. One, it's an easy ask to ask where you stand on these things. And two, for me, I support Israel. It's a pretty simple one for me. I would have been there to not only represent my district, to see Prime Minister Netanyahu speak, but in support of Prime Minister Netanyahu and Israel.
Well, we'll leave it there, but I just want to say absolutely nothing here about Israel or Netanyahu. In fact, he was tweeting about President Zelensky and Ukraine on the day of Netanyahu's speech. He has retweeted the National Park Service statement about the incidents with the pro-Hamas protesters, and I kid you not, it was just 13. So last night, he put out a statement saying that violence and destruction is wrong, and he immediately pivoted to January 6th. He immediately changed the subject from the pro-Hamas protests and the anti-Semitic protests and made it about January 6th. So that's Eugene Vindman, 7th District of Virginia. And this is Derrick Anderson, 7th District of Virginia. Mr. Anderson, thanks for joining us as always.
Thank you, Derrick.
Thanks, my friends. Take care, y'all. Thanks again.
It's 7:17.
WMAL.
Making sense of the news.
Live.
From the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios.
Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
For all your glass, mirror, and shower door needs, visit DullasGlass.com. Dullas Glass. Love your glass.
So J.D. Vance is under fire for statements that he made several years ago when he was not the vice presidential nominee and certainly wasn't even a senator. He was a guest on Fox News. And he's been talking about this for a while, this idea that many decisions that are made about that affect parents and their children are made by people who aren't parents and don't have children. And when he was on Tucker Carlson, he used, some fun and flamboyant language.
I call it colorful.
Colorful language. Here, listen.
It doesn't make any sense that we've turned our country over to people who don't really have a direct stake in it. What he's saying is that we're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. And it's just a basic fact. You look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children. And how does it make any sense that we've turned our country over to people who don't really have a direct stake in it?
All right, so now he has gotten a lot of pushback on this from conservatives or people in the Republican side as well, saying, "Oh, you're insulting women. You're insulting women who try to have children, who want to have children. It's not their fault that they can't have children." So let's first of all give you a little bit more context here. When he talks about these issues, he often preambles it with this:
"Let's give votes to all children in this country, but let's give control over those."
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. He preambles it with this.
Now, let me do the necessary throat clearing because I do think it's important. Look, a lot of people are unable to have kids for very complicated and important reasons. I know, good friends of mine who have struggled to find the right girl, find the right guy. There are people, of course, for biological reasons, medical reasons, that can't have children. The target of these remarks is not them. It's important to point that out. There have always been people like that who, even though they would like to have kids, unable to have them. Let's set them to the side.
There. So he's literally not talking about them. But at the same time, for God's sake, everybody needs to sort of get over their own personal emotions about an issue like that and look at the larger point that he's making, which I think is a legitimate point, Patrice.
Well, so let's take it in two pieces. The first piece is this going to turn off women voters? I've been actually asked by reporters about this. And, I think women think more broadly than just a one-off statement made by someone with, hopefully they understand without context. So I don't think this is going to sink the Trump-Vance ship, if folks feel that way. Number two, I understand, because it is such a sensitive topic, that some women who don't have children will feel, oh, he's talking about me. But then when you actually provide the context that hopefully, debunks this idea that he was talking about all women who don't have children, including those who can't have children. No, he's talking about a very specific type of person. And he while he refers to cat ladies, that could easily be extended to cat men.
Yes, exactly.
The people who sit on school boards making decisions about your children's future education and cultural indoctrination. Some of them don't have children. Some of them have no skin in the game in that regard, yet there making these sweeping policies. So, I get the pearl clutching, but as always, I've learned, Larry, we gotta wait for a little bit more information to come out, because then when we actually move beyond just that emotional moment, we realize, oh, there's actually more to the story.
Well, of course there is, and but honestly, listen, my heart goes out to people who want to have children and can't have children. Clearly, that's not what this isn't even about having children. It's about people who don't have a stake in the game, making literally life or death decisions about our children in these government-run schools, and having a say and having a very powerful say. Look at Randy Weingart. Look at Carl Frisch, the chairman of the school board in Fairfax County, who is an LGBTQ activist, who swore his oath on a stack of child pornography books, and he's now making decisions about how your children are to be handled in public schools. And frankly, I think as a parent that there's a little bit of an unequal playing field. I don't think that it should be as... I don't think people who don't have children, who have... that specifically get into a position to make decisions about our children, should have the equal weight as actual parents whose children are actually affected by those decisions.
Well, but we should. I wouldn't say that they can't hold these offices.
I didn't say they couldn't hold these offices. I said that they shouldn't have so much power over the rest of us who don't have children.
I get exactly what you're saying. I'm just saying that, we've got to vet the decisions that all of these leaders are making. What if they have children or if they don't, and they absolutely need to be listening to parents, especially if they themselves are not in that position where they get right away what a parent's opposition may be to what they're saying.
Now
on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 7:36 here on O'Connor and Company. Thanks for tuning in at 8:05. Matt Bonesteel, the Washington Post sports department, to talk about the beginning of the Olympics tonight. And then at 8:35, Brett Baer, Fox News Channel. I'm Larry O'Connor alongside Patrice Onwuka. Good morning, Patrice.
Good morning. Happy Friday, everybody.
That was the sound. That was the sound Wednesday night in front of Union Station as pro-Hamas anti-Semitic protesters dragged a Park Service police officer across the pavement. Arrests were made, but just yesterday we learned that those arrested specifically for assaulting a police officer were released and charges were dropped. Joining us now is Greggory Pemberton. He's the chairman of the D.C. Police Union, and although that wasn't your department assaulted Wednesday night, it was your brother in uniform, your brother or sister in blue. Thanks for joining us.
Larry, Patrice, thanks so much for having me.
This is kind of indicative of what's going on in Washington, D.C., no matter which of the many law enforcement agencies that are here. We get a lot of lip service about how, oh, my gosh, we want to protect our cops. We need to protect our cops. But when push comes to shove, it all depends on the political ideology, it appears, of those who are harming police officers.
Well, that's right. I think the first issue here is, as you mentioned in the opening, is that all of these agencies are completely understaffed. We saw an incredibly violent week just in the past 48 hours. It was 12 shot, 2 killed, 2 triple shootings, 1 double shooting. And then on top of that, all of the civil disturbance that you see. And we just do not have the personnel, whether that's, MPD or the Park Police or even the Capitol Police. You may have seen online they even asked 200 NYPD officers to come down and help, and that's still not enough because we're just not doing enough to make sure the staffing is correct. But you're absolutely right. In my almost 20 years of experience, what I can tell you is that, and first let me just say that anybody who comes to the city in a group and decides to destroy property and harm people and hurt cops and threaten others, you need to be arrested and charged to the full extent of the law. That's not protesting.
A quaint that's an old-fashioned notion.
It is, right? But I think, unfortunately, as you pointed out, when we do arrest those people who come in the city and cause that kind of damage or hurt people, there's some sort of rubric that goes on about what their ideology is to determine whether or not we charge them. And that's a really sad commentary on what's happening is, well, why were they doing it? And if it falls in line with certain ideologies, then they're let out without charges. If it's not in line with those ideologies, then we throw them underneath the jail, and it's a really sort of frustrating place to be.
Well, it's absolutely frustrating as citizens and and people visiting the city, or people who just want to see their capital protected at all times. I'm wondering how can we address the shortage of officers, whether it's DC Police, the National Park Police. I mean, can technology be an assistant in this case? I'm just trying to figure out from a solution standpoint what can be done, because obviously the challenges of recruitment, are longstanding and continue to get worse. But is there a way to get around some of those recruitment challenges?
I mean, sure. There's ways that we can do things to get around the recruitment challenges, but they're not going to solve problem, right? These are eyedropper levels worth of fixes when we need a fire hose. We have to take these recruiting issues on head on, and these retention issues. We're actually having more officers resign from the department than retire, and the retirements are up considerably more than they were just say 3 or 4 years ago. So until we start correcting what's going on within the working conditions and within the environment of policing in these individual agencies, I don't think there's any type of technology or tool that's going to, allow us to handle these things. Because what you need over the past few days, like you've seen, is just a significant number of police officers to respond and keep the peace and address these crimes that are going on in the neighborhoods. So we really have to deal with the recruiting issue first. Let's get right to it, because most of these law enforcement agencies, if not all of them, get much of their funding from the federal government. That includes DC Metro. A big part of the way the District of Columbia operates is that they get money from the federal government because it's the federal capital city. So in your estimation, we heard that this protest got out of control and it ended up being mob-like behavior with vandalism, destruction, theft, violence. It happened because the police were not adequately staffed to handle this. Do you believe that what we're seeing now is a direct result from the defund the police movement from 4 years ago? Without question, absolutely without question, that's what it was. So if you rewind the clock back to 2020, every politician in the country, even on some of the right side of the aisle, were suggesting that we needed to do something to tamp down on law enforcement, and this idea that police brutality is rampant everywhere and we shouldn't have police doing these type of enforcement strategies. And the remnants of all of the legislation that went through, particularly on the local levels throughout the country, still exists. And that's what's prohibiting the agencies from being fully staffed and from officers being able to go out and get out of their car and do their job properly. So until we start to go back and look at what was done in that 2020, 2022 era, with all of the legislation that was passed, particularly locally, and if you talk here in D.C., the Policing and Criminal Justice Reform Act is a nightmare, and it still exists in its entirety. It has not been amended at all, and it is the number one reason why we cannot hire people and why so many officers leave this agency before their time. And so until politicians go back and look at these things, I don't think things are going to change much. I'm no expert, but just by looking at sort of how Western civilization has figured out law enforcement over the many centuries, you have enough law enforcement officers to be able to keep the peace. If someone does break the law, you arrest them, and you then try them and prosecute them. It's that simple. And none of those things are happening right now in D.C. Maybe some arrests are made if a cop is able to arrest somebody, considering how short-staffed, but everything else has fallen apart. Maybe we'll be able to reinvent the wheel soon here, Greg Pemberton. Thanks for joining us, as always. Larry, Patrice, thank you so much. Have a good day. It's 7:43. The Daily Press Briefing with Karine Jean-Pierre. Yesterday, it was startling as she continued to dodge the fundamental question that we still haven't gotten the answer to. Why did Joe Biden decide at the last minute, inexplicably, without consulting his staff, without any sort of sign? The last thing we heard from Joe Biden was, "You betcha I'm in it, I'm winning, I'm not going anywhere." He was defiant. He was angry that anyone would suggest he wouldn't continue as the nominee. And then, without any notice or any explanation, even after his address, he dropped out. So why?
Yesterday, you were asked a couple of times about the rationale for the president's decision to tune in. One thing the president did not say was explicitly why he stepped aside. He talked about how he believed it was in the best interest of the country to step aside, but why did he believe he was going to lose to Donald Trump?
Look, I think that the president actually answered this question. I think the American people think he answered the question.
No, we don't.
No.
It tells you she clearly has no idea what we think. And one reporter actually was pretty good.
And I believe the American people got it. They understood it.
It was clear I wouldn't be asked the question, but I'll move on.
I think it's clear. Okay. I do. I think the American people do.
So if it's clear, just say it. That's the thing.
Exactly.
She says, well, I think it was very clear. Okay, then what is it? Well, the president was clear. Okay, well, then say it. Well, the president was clear, and everybody understood what he said. Okay, repeat it for those of us who didn't get it. She won't do it because he wasn't.
Because she's got a good knack at making you think you're crazy when she's the one who is totally evasive and frankly lying.
Well, as Katie Pavlich said yesterday on The Five, I think it was, there's just a few options here. Number one, it was because he knew he was going to lose to Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And he can't say that. Right. He can't say that for multiple reasons.
He can't admit it, no.
Right. Number two, because he's got mental deficiencies and he's not capable physically or mentally. And he can't say that because then he'd have to answer the question as to why he's capable of being president but not running for office. Number three, he was forced out against his will. He didn't actually want to relinquish the nomination, and he can't say that. That's the only reason. That's the only reason why we're not getting an actual fundamental answer to the question. But we still deserve to know. Also, Peter Doocy pressed Karine Jean-Pierre on this whole rewriting of history that they're engaging in, trying to tell us that Kamala Harris was never the border czar.
Democrats on Capitol Hill are being handed this card with talking points about the vice president and the border. Do you know who's handing this out?
I have no idea. You probably should ask her campaign.
So the first one says Vice President Harris was never appointed border czar. There's never been such a position. It doesn't exist. Why are Democrats so sensitive about the vice president and the border?
Why are Republicans so sensitive about actually not owning up to them getting in the way of a border?
Well, and of course that's not an answer, but that is the fundamental. The fundamental question is, or the obvious observation is, they are distancing Kamala Harris from any responsibility with the border because the Democrats and the Biden administration and Kamala Harris realize that it is a disaster. The American people see it as a disaster, and they're trying to separate her from the reality of what happened there.
And it's a losing issue. And the fact that they're handing out paper note cards with these printed talking points is not surprising. By the way, they're sending these talking points out to every demographic. I've have it under good authority that a bunch of Hispanic leaders and organizations are getting the very same talking points. Yeah. So this is going out far and wide, which is why when you hear it on the news from all these pundits, they say the same thing because they've been told what to say.
Yeah, we're used to them lying and marching in lockstep. Real fast, let's let Peter Doocy have the last word here because the talking points say, no, she was just put in charge of going to Guatemala and addressing the root causes, which, by the way, Doocy points out, well, then there's a fundamental question here.
Do you think that the border would be less of a talking point now if there was less migration to the border, say if somebody had addressed root causes of migration sooner?
Wait, hold on a second. Did you not hear the beginning of I know there were a lot of toppers, but one of the toppers, I talked about what we're seeing at the border. It's down by 55%.
Lies. That's the fundamental thing. Whenever they come back and say, well, he wasn't a border czar, she went to the root causes, then immediately follow up and say, yeah, and how'd that go? The only salvageable thing they have is she went down to address the root causes. And if she was effective, then we wouldn't have seen the largest illegal crossing of our border over the last 3 years in the history of our country.